Today's debate topic is quite a double-barreled one. Is God necessary to explain reality and provide a consistent basis for values? I intend to demonstrate that not only is it God necessary to explain reality, but also that no consistent basis for morals and values is possible without God. Let's start by mentioning a basic question. What is reality? And why does it need an explanation? Reality is simply the existence of finite and limited things as opposed to the existence of nothing. If nothing exists, then no explanation would be required. However, if something exists and it is limited and defined in extent, form and composition, it would need an explanation. And by explanation, we mean cause. So to explain the occurrence of something is actually to explain its cause. This constitutes the burden of explanation that is upon both theists and atheists and agnostics alike. Now, contrary to what is popularly believed, the method of exploring and mapping out tangible reality that we can sense, i.e. science, is not necessary to ultimately explaining this question, since the need to explain reality is just as much pressing to two goldfish whose entire universe is contained in a goldfish bowl as it is to humans who gaze up at the sky and extend their gaze only as far as has been traversed by light, limited by the speed of light and the age of the universe. We'd not be able to work this out outside of the universe, what created it, by merely studying the contents of the universe, any more than a goldfish would be able to work out what or made the goldfish bowl by studying the walls in the bowl or the number of pebbles and plastic seaweed in it. When we ask what created something, we are actually asking what defined its form, limitations and characteristics. To define something, definis, in Latin means to met out its limitations and boundaries. Everything that has boundaries, limits, form and finitude was defined by something else, whether it's an external force or by the sum of its internal consistence and components. Put simply, we know for certain that if I was to hold a rock or pick any rock from the surrounding area, we would know that the rock had been created or made by it, because it has a shape and a composition. It either defines itself before it existed, which is rationally absurd, or it doesn't have any limitations and is infinite, but then why would it have shape? The only conclusion left is that any rock we might pick or view was made by something else, whether a mindless process or a thing with agency. If a rock wasn't formed with cooling lava or meteorite strikes or weathering or by artificial hands, would it have any shape? No, because it wouldn't have been shaped or formed, and therefore it simply wouldn't exist. Likewise, reality with its dimensions and objects and their recurrent and consistent behaviors we call laws. We have to ask what ultimately defined or determined these properties that we observe. This is because we need an ultimate explanation for the sum total of finite and limited reality. There must be an ultimate explanation or cause, since it is rationally impossible for there to be an infinite regress of finite causes prior to our existence. As put simply, we'd never reach this moment in this infinite regress. If my journey from London to Nottingham today had taken an infinite amount of time and required I'll try to buy a car, required my car to traverse an infinite amount of distance, would we ever arrive in Nottingham? No. Likewise, we know that a changing universe had a beginning, because if it was eternal, we'd have to wait an infinite amount of time to reach any moment of existence. Consequently, this moment and all of us would never exist. Furthermore, what's the essence of the smallest particle? What's it made out of? Again, if there were an infinite series of Matryoshka doll or Russian nesting doll-like elements, no particles would ever exist. At some point, we have to concede that something is sustaining all matter and energy, whatever we mean by energy. Therefore, the only explanation that remains is that the ultimate explanation or cause of finite reality is that there is another reality in addition to our own, an infinite reality, opposite of finite reality, that gave rise to and currently sustains our reality. This force is infinite, unchanging, and without shape, rendering it the exact opposite of a finite thing, and therefore in need of nothing to define it, form it, shape it, or give it characteristics. This leaves us with a remaining question: is it mindless or is it an agent? I.e., does it have will or intention? This infinite force, being the first cause, we deduce rationally, could not be compelled by any internal, external mechanism to create the universe and us. It follows that it intended to create our finite reality. And if it has intention, then it has will and could not be mindless. This reality, which is both without limits, finitude, or precursors, and which possesses intent, can be called anything you want. However, since we're speaking English, I'd like to suggest an English name for this, and that I think would best fit. And I think this would be called God. In light of this, we are rationally moved to conclude that God is necessary to explain our reality, all while their explanations fail to provide a rationally consistent alternative, and the individual who is dogmatically insistent on denying God, for whatever personal reasons bedevil them, is forced to simply deny either reality exists at all, or that we shouldn't believe in anything that can't be directly seen, despite the fact that they are happy to do so with much cognitive dissonance in every other area of their lives, including in the sciences. This is clearly evident by the fact that aside from agnostics, the idea of God is not even considered a plausible alternative explanation or theory by many professing to be atheists. And the idea that we can deduce things beyond what we can see by looking at the finite nature of anything that we do see is the basic premise of all thinking and the sciences. A geologist knows when they look at a rock that the rock has been created, as much as a layman looking at the same rock would also conclude that the rock was made by something else. And that's merely due to the rock not being infinite, but being a certain shape and form. This is what we common rationality, and it's the basis behind science. If you throw this out, then you throw out the basis of all science, thinking, and rationality. But furthermore, morality cannot exist without meaning and purpose. The existence of God and God's intended creation of all finite reality means, at the very least, that everything that exists in our finite reality was intended. This intention means that everything that exists and existed and will exist is intended and therefore becomes imbued with purpose and meaning. Words only have meaning because they have an intended signification or information behind what they convey. Likewise, our finite reality has meaning and intention behind it. This becomes significant as a basis for all other concepts of meaning. The purpose of a car defines its meaning. The purpose, as we know for cars, are transportation. If a car gets you from A to B, it is a good car. But if a car breaks down, it is a bad car. The concepts, or should I say the words good and bad, can only be understood by measuring an action according to whether it fulfills the intention behind the created thing. If humans were intended, then we now have a basis to measure actions as either good or bad. If humans are not intended, then our finite reality, and that our finite reality had inflationary constants and electromagnetic forces finely tuned to produce life as a matter of pure coincidence, which is a highly risible concept, then there is no good and bad because human life has no intention behind it, and the universe, or finite reality, has no intention behind it. The only good and bad in such reality is merely the possible and the impossible. Now, I'm not saying that this makes massacres, killings, rape, colonization, and exploitation become good. I'm merely pointing out that if there is no meaning to human life, it doesn't make these actions anything at all. The idea of human rights, or natural rights as they were first called during the so-called Western Enlightenment, was the idea that observing the universe built by the Creator could teach us the intention of the Creator for human beings, and therefore give us an idea of the natural rights that humans should enjoy. Jeremy Bentham declared the idea of natural rights to be nonsense on stilts, and argued instead for a utilitarian perspective where actions were only judged based purely by reference to the achievement of a desired goal by any human in question. Human desire then became the only measure of what is good or bad, and herein lies the problem. You see, it's not that atheists can, and no one's arguing that atheists cannot perform actions that would be considered moral by people who believed in divinely established natural rights. The observation I'm merely pointing to is that unless atheists embrace mental compartmentalization and hold on to dogmatically morals bequeathed to them from a religious legacy within their societies, or they don't question the mental conditioning their parents implemented on them to condition their adult behavior, they have no argument to justify or refute any desire they or anyone else possesses, whether it fits in with accepted social norms or goes outside them. What remains to atheists is not morality, but culture and childhood conditioning. However, today's debate is not about the intellectual justification for morals. It's actually about motivational consistency in morals, and it's about whether God is necessary to provide a consistent basis for values. So let's examine motivational consistency. Motivational consistency means that a moral standard possesses the ability to motivate someone consistently to live and behave by moral codes regardless of the situation or inconvenience. The trick here is to ensure that people act consistently with the moral code in like-for-like situations that do not depend on their personal convenience. Now, atheists or materialist moralists may argue that there might not exist a higher objective morality outside the material world. However, we can construct, based on a social contract, a type of list of morals by which we can establish society for the greater benefit of all. To wit, they play a game to construct society based on what is called lightened self-interests and asks everyone to play by the same rules and allow everyone to achieve their common interests. But this relies on two assumptions. It assumes that everyone starts off with equal capability and equal starting positions, something that human realities just don't bear out. And it also assumes that the rules will never get in the way of people's interests, and that people will never be tempted to cheat or use shortcuts when they are confident no one is looking. What if the people playing this game were unequal players, and some could work the rules well enough to gain so much of their interests that others end up without attaining theirs? Like, for example, the wealth disparity we see in capitalism. Some people will have more wealth than others. Some people have more opportunity and connections. Some have more skill than others. Some are more attractive than others. Apparently, this individual in California, Elliot Rodger, was so frustrated with the fact that he couldn't get any girls that he decided to take out his wrath upon individuals on the street by killing women and men, or jocks as he calls them, because he believes that he was the perfect gentleman and he couldn't get women, and women were only interested in the bad guys, and so he decided that was unfair, and so he decided to kill people based on what he considered to be unfair, and what he did was obviously grotesque. However, we have to look, what incentive did those people who see others getting ahead of them have to follow the rules that are clearly benefiting some people more than others? Furthermore, what about people who see that their interest may be reasonably attained by cheating? In either case, we would expect materially motivated people to see it as wise to accept. So would we expect people who are materially motivated to see it as wise accepting losses in the service of a greater good? Well, the communists couldn't motivate people to do actions for the greater good without profit incentives, despite the fact they threatened them with gulags and other such quote-unquote inducements. And look at what about in criminology? Criminologists have a concept or a model called rational choice theory, whereby they explain that many criminal activities are done because the criminal perceives it to be rational to attain their interests. People have often heard the saying, it's only a crime if you get caught, or rules are made to be broken. If our ancestors would go out for hunting accepting that there would be risk in doing so in order to get a benefit, then why do we expect modern humans to not to play with risk to get their interests too? Especially if they feel they are disenfranchised, or that they feel that they didn't want to work the 9-to-5 slog and they want to get rich quickly. And people would argue, well, if everyone did that, society would collapse on itself, and who could countenance or justify that action when, if everyone was doing it, society would collapse? But here's the assumption. You can break the rules without society collapsing. You can break the rules, you can cheat, you can lie, you can defraud. If no one catches you, then society doesn't collapse. Heck, even if you do the crime, you're caught, society doesn't collapse. So arguing that people would abstain from doing bad actions because society would collapse and therefore the common interest would be against that is not really kind of seen in actual practice. We also see that people might have self-interest without any consequence. For example, some rich capitalists might be okay to pollute the world and make more profit because, heck, it's not them that's going to live in the polluted world in the future. So they don't see any consequence in their lifetime, and they don't see much motivation to prevent or to not take advantage. What about belief in justice? I would actually argue the concept of justice has killed more people than any other concept. Just the word justice itself has killed more people than any other concept in human history. And envy and jealousy between people arise because people believe that we are all equal. So if someone is richer or is more attractive or is more intelligent, you see envy and jealousy rise amongst people. And many experiments have shown that when people are playing a game and some people are getting ahead in that game, that people will expend resources to actually undermine their competitors in that game, to actually undermine each other. And many experiments have shown this. So how do you get rid of this? You can't, because nature exists in natural inequalities. You can't get rid of them. And what about if you're a powerful nation against weaker nations? What could you argue against American colonialists to not colonize the New World? You couldn't argue anything against them. They got away with it. What about those who colonized Australia? They got away with it, and they benefit from it, and their descendants benefit from it, and there's nothing you could argue against them because they had no consequence to their actions. In fact, human history is a litany of tribes oppressing other tribes because it doesn't destroy their own society by attacking other countries around the world. And so they do it because they might have a benefit in it. They see it as a benefit, resources, land, territory, and they pursue that benefit without consequence. But just to kind of bring it in, which I'll kind of conclude, we also see that if you base ideologies around human convenience, and you base rights around human convenience, well then the God of human convenience giveth, and the God of human convenience taketh away. We saw debates in America about torture, whether torture should be legalized. Well, not legalized, sorry, that it shouldn't be prohibited. Because they said, if it saves lives, why not, is the argument. And the debate was whether it works or not that it goes against people's natural rights. Because as Jeremy Bentham said, natural rights is nonsense on stilts. So then the only argument you could ever bring is, does it work? Doesn't it work? We see secular kind of tolerance only applies when it's convenient. But we see both John Locke writing in his book, ironically titled A Letter on Toleration, John Milton, as well as many others, talk about that you do not tolerate minorities where you can't be sure that they are loyal to the state. They don't have a right of toleration. You shouldn't tolerate these minorities. And you see that throughout European history, post-Enlightenment, minorities have repeatedly been subject to suspicion, persecution, and oppression because they were perceived to be a threat to our civilization, to Western civilization. Heck, even my colleague here, Arif Ahmed, described the Islam as the greatest political threat in the West today, constituting a global threat, and it represents an extreme threat to our life in the West. So then what do you do with a Muslim minority if you think Islam is a threat to the West? Well, rationally speaking, you would limit a minority if you think they were truly represented, or they followed an ideology which truly represented a threat to your civilization. And the same was said about the Jews, and the same was said about the Catholics prior to that. We've seen this repetition in the so-called post-Enlightenment, secular, tolerant West. Because rights are only as good as they are convenient when you get rid of natural rights. We see Sam Harris, actually another atheist, who justified the possibility of torture if it saves lives. We see John Rawls, famous secular liberal John Rawls, argue that he called it the supreme emergency exemption. He said there are occasions when you can bomb civilians, target civilians, if you reckon you will win, it will help you win the war. And he cites World War II as his paradigm. You can't say John Rawls is a fringe liberal. You can't say it. He's actually paradigmatic as a secular liberal. Of course, one could also argue that why tolerate religious belief if religious belief is false consciousness, as the communists argued. And that religion is dangerous. Many atheists argue that religion is dangerous. So then why tolerate it? Because the idea of freedom is a metaphysical idea, it's not a physical idea. So where is the basis if it's no longer convenient to offer freedom? Which is why we see many states become more authoritarian when they face with terrorism or threats or what have you, or blown out of proportion, of course. Because they can then justify to their people, we have to take these rights away because they're no longer convenient. That is the God of human convenience. Religion, on the other hand, offers inducements that are counterintuitive. Forgiving enemies, forgiving those who trespass against you, believing that God will right wrongs, and will ask and account those people who've been given more in this life. Don't get jealous, because God will ask more to those who've been given more. So everything balances out in a hereafter. We see that, and this is the point what I'm trying to make, is not that religious morality is compatible with secular liberalism, and we're going to probably hear this discussion that many religious beliefs are not compatible with secular liberalism. I don't really care about compatibility with secularism at all whatsoever. My only argument is consistency. And we see that religious morality, at least with some religions, has greater potential to offer a more consistent set of morals, because these morals are based on divinely inspired or divine morals and ethics which are not subject to human convenience. Whereas if you base morality on human convenience, well, then that can change, and it does frequently change. The universe is chaos. Therefore, any morality born of materialist ideologies would also be inconsistent, inconstant, and full of contradictions. If you make as your basis for morality human convenience, then what the God of human convenience giveth, then the God of human convenience can equally and as lightly taketh away. Therefore, if we are to have a consistent basis for values and morality, other than the capricious, mercurial vagaries of human convenience, then morality and values must be pinned or anchored on a basis that possesses objective existence, which can only be the intent of the will of a creator. This can only be God, and therefore God is not only necessary to explain reality, but provide a consistent basis for values. Thank you.